Our speaker is Jonathan Clayton from South Africa. He's one of the experts we have in Africa about restorative justice. More than 30 years. We call his name. And he's also the ambassador of the Restorative Justice Program. He's from South Africa. I love him too much. He's a good guy. And he speaks well. You'll discover it. So, Jonathan, you are welcome. I know that you are missing someone, but she's there. Welcome, Jonathan.
Good afternoon. It is indeed a great privilege and honor for myself to address you today at the International Prison Chaplains Conference on the topic of restorative justice from an African perspective. And I trust that I will also hear from my fellow African brothers and sisters. If there's anything that I say that they don't agree, please raise your hand and correct me wherever you can, but I will try my best to just do exactly what is expected from me at this conference on this topic. We just heard that our chaplain from Africa, representative of IPCA, was just saying that I'm missing someone here. Someone said to me yesterday, it's the first time that they see me without my wife. And we journeyed together for 34 years, and we never attend any conference anywhere without each other. So it is a great miss, but there are some reasons why she is not here with us, but she also sent her greetings and her apology. And this is the woman that really shaped me over the years. And later on, when there's a statement that I will make, you will understand it comes from her teaching, her taking the responsibility to hold me accountable for my life. I also bring greetings from Dr. Menzi Makatini, our national prison chaplain in South Africa, who also can't be here with us at this conference, and we trust the next one he will join us. But he sent his greetings, and it was very sad that he could not be here. So I trust that as we journey through this process, that you will have a little bit of insight about the restorative justice from an African point of view. But I will give you some more details because it's an extremely complex situation to cover Africa, and you will see in a little while that Africa is huge. It's a huge continent, a continent of 1.56 billion people with 54 states. And that makes it a real challenge. How do we work together on the process of restorative justice? Because each individual country has their own form of government, language, and custom. So wherever you move around in Africa, you need to make sure that you do not overstep any boundaries in terms of you coming from South Africa and thinking you can walk into any country in Africa and people will just understand you. You have to understand the language, you have to understand the customs and the people. Africa holds approximately 3.8 million incarcerated people. 1/3 of the global prison population of 11.5 million incarcerated people. 1/3. And this information comes from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and Prison Matters, which was recently in 2025. 54 states in Africa, they are also recognized members of the African Union which is great, and also recognized by the United Nations. And so Africa is a country where people enjoy to connect with people. But it is a huge start. And obviously, maybe the question is, how do you present restorative justice with so many different states, different cultures, different customs, but also individual countries running on their own as a government? But we're going to give you some details, and we have many people from Africa coming to the point of Africa, which is South Africa, Cape Town, and a prison called Pollsmoor, where we had hundreds and hundreds of people from Africa and all over the world to come and observe this process. Algeria is Africa's largest country by area, but Nigeria is the largest by population. And I will share with you about Nigeria in a little while. Crime in Africa, this is just a few. Human trafficking, corruption, murder, rape, armed robbery, theft, fraud, organized crime a lot nowadays, and armed trafficking, because we have even now police behind bars who sold firearms of the police to gangsters, and a high rate of violent crimes. And I want to warn you that one of the principles of restorative justice speaks about focus on the harm caused by crime. And so when we focus on the harm caused by crime, it's very graphic. And it's not everybody that can handle graphic information. People run away from graphic information, but we experience how even hardened criminals really understand when they focus on the harm they cause by the offenders, the victims. Unfortunately, factors like poverty, unemployment, and wealth inequality contribute to these crimes. But also we are a resilient people. Africa, are we a resilient people? Yeah. No, man, you disappoint me. Are we resilient people? And if you understand, and I don't have the time to give you the history of Africa and South Africa, but all that I can say, we live in dark, dark days. And I will give a little bit of information about that, but I walk around in Africa and I see the smiles of people. I see the relationships of people. I see the openness. And we have people from all over the world even coming into Pollsmoor, and they will always say to us, wow, your people are friendly. They overwhelm us with the way they greet us and even appreciate our presence here. And this is Africa. South Africa has 60 million people. And here are some of the specific challenges to restorative justice in Africa. The punitive mindset. And I will share with you how we inherited this punitive mindset. Deeply ingrained and preference to punitive responses with a formal criminal justice system. Now, the punitive system, I will explain to you in a little while, but it is still a challenge in Africa, it's still a challenge in South Africa, and our people, some of them, still believe that this is the way we should go. Then there is also the lack of resources and training. And that is why even now I take 3 days, 18 hours for the 3 days to even equip correctional officials on the process of restorative justice and victim-offender dialogue processes. because the training is important for the officers, for churches, for the community, but also for our incarcerated people and also our victims of crime. The power of imbalances is still there, and the restorative justice process risks failing to achieve a fair balance of power between the victims of crime and the community as well. And then also the victim safety. And that is why there is a huge challenge with the crime that's committed in Africa, in South Africa. It's brutal, brutal, brutal crimes. I can understand where victims want to lock them up and throw the key away. I can understand when people get a parole date that the community is upset. The community is scared because the community still have the mindset of Johnny 20 years ago. We can understand that because the crime was brutal. So the victims are also concerned about their safety. And then also the cultural and historical factors. And this is a fact. You have to come and live in Africa to see how colonialism, the impact of colonialism in Africa has still a huge challenge. But I can say today, we're over that. We're over that. We have the capacity to forgive. We have the capacity to move on. We can't stop what happened many years ago. The same in South Africa with apartheid, where you have to look at the board before you can enter a train, a post office, a shop, because there is always a board saying whites only. And we had to live under that oppression, but we moved on. Because restorative justice, healing and restoration is extremely important. That's why we never had a war after 1994. Because Nelson Mandela took the road of forgiving. And then also the apartheid South Africa, and then the indigenous systems. Restorative justice must be sensitive and integrate the values of African indigenous legal traditions. And that our people are still fighting for that, and you will see why, and the reason is because this was in place before. The perceived of leniency and corruption. I can only speak for my own country. There were a number of high-profile people in South Africa that was referred to by the commission that they need to be charged. Nobody was charged yet. Nobody was charged yet. There is a huge challenge now in South Africa about the corruption in our police. And now there's another commission, and people are saying nothing is going to happen. So if our top structure have these challenges, what must we do? Are we going to fight against them, or are we going to look at the direction of restoration and healing and no revenge? There are people that want to take revenge, but we choose different. The lack of awareness. And that is why we understand when we even reach out to the victims of crime, that they will say to you that you are now the first people in 15 years that knock on our door. Since the crime was committed against our loved one, nobody came to us. And they almost had to put a foundation under a building and walk alongside these people. And that's why from an international point of view, we're saying even to the offenders, it can take up till a minimum of 1 year to prepare victims for a possible victim-offender dialogue. It's not an overnight thing. We spend so many hours with a group of offenders, and they need to respect also the victims of crime. So Africa, like Rwanda, was colonized by two different Western European colonial powers. It was challenging. The Dutch and the British imported their legal system into South Africa. And you will see that the challenges of that in a little while. That's why people still say, people believe, even in our country. And if we look at the original process of conflict resolution in our Aboriginal countries and Aboriginal people and the marginalized people, the Western criminal justice system took that away. And some of the reasons why people say, lock them up and throw the key away. How much time do you spend with these people? Look at the statistics here. They found in 1 year, January 24, January 25, 41,000 cell phones in prison. 41,000 cell phones in prison. They found sharpened objects. 11,000 sharpened objects in our prisons in South Africa. Even alcohol. Okay, and also the substance abuses. Even cash, money, 201,000 rand in cash. But you know what? When I receive this kind of information, this doesn't make me depressed or discourage me. I brought this into the restorative justice process. And I don't care whether you are the highest gang member in our prisons. I can stand face to face with you in a therapeutic process, very caring, and say, let's talk, because this is going to upset the victims of crime and the community also, if the statistics comes out. And so we address these issues with them. The recidivism rate we brought into the restorative justice process. And I had a long list of reasons why there is recidivism, but I give you a few of them. Not prepared to make sacrifices to let go of the gang ego. Family dynamics, unemployment, peer pressure, unconfessed sin or crime. If I can just mention on the unconfessed crime, we know that almost 60% of a group of either 24, 28 or 32 offenders that we journey with on restorative justice for between 80 and 100 hours. We journey with them. But right from the beginning, there's about 60% of them that will convince us that they are not guilty, and they will also convince us that they just want to move on. By the question when it comes to responsibility, we ask them, how many of you committed crime that nobody knows about? There's always about, out of 24 people, around about 300 to 400 people that raise their hands. They never confessed their crime. They never took responsibility. The second question that we asked them, how many of you pleaded not guilty? More than 50% raised their hands and say they plead not guilty. Then I said, okay, let's do this. How many of you knew, although you pleaded not guilty, but you knew you're guilty, and then you just wave at me, and then I have to have the hands like this. The one is, I pleaded not guilty. The other one is, I knew I'm guilty. And then they go this, and as they go, when people look around, they just look down. But that is a step in the right direction, at least that they make that confession. Unresolved issues, education challenges, and they want to take shortcuts, challenging to start over again. It's a huge challenge. They don't want to start from the beginning. And also, there's much more reasons. And in 2017, we got the news that people that served a life sentence and got parole, the recidivism rate of that is 1%, because there's a thorough process in place. And I didn't get the latest stats on that now. You must change until the day you die. You must change until the day you die. I don't know how many of you heard where offenders will tell you, but I'm changed. And in a documentary, which is much longer, I made this statement, and many people ask me the question, why did I make this statement, you must change until the day you die? Now this is also based on my own life. And I thought I'm going to bring it in here for just a minute or two. That 38 years ago, I was on our national television called Police File for Fraud. And on that same evening, on the 4th of March 1991, I was arrested. And I knew at that time, when I looked out and I saw the blue lights around the house, I knew my life is over. I knew that I will never see hope again. I never believed in 1988 about hope. Never ever. Nobody could encourage me to have faith, to have hope, to trust God, because that was not part of my mindset. And then I was certain sentenced after 7 years waiting trial to 6 years imprisonment. And during that sentence, I lost my mother. And I lost more hope. But not to give you too much information now, my story is on YouTube under my name. But my friend that I met at 16 years old remained my friend for 14 years. And she regularly came to visit me. And on my release, she encouraged me to go to my father, to make right with my father. And I said to her, don't do this to me. I'm not going to go. Because in my mind is, if I'm going to challenge him about issues of the past, and he's going to say to me, at least I never land up in prison, how will I deal with that? But you know what? And this is my encouragement to many incarcerated people in any country where I'm going to, any prison in our own country, that you can rebel against God. But as my wife prepared a sermon one day with biblical references, but God. You can repent or you can just turn your back on God, but God's got a way to get you. And that day was the second time that God showed me, I am in control of your life. I love you. I will journey with you. And when I got to my father and I saw him there, a little boy came around the corner. He grabbed me and he put his arms around me. And I asked my father, who's this? And he said, this is your little brother. I picked him up and I walked to my father. There was no words than just embracing one another. And I thought, I never ever expected something like this to happen. And so I moved on with my life. And again, I'm not here to talk about myself, but I wanted you just to know where I come from. And so the restorative justice, it's about a 27-year journey on restorative justice out of our 34 years in prison chaplaincy. Working in Nigeria, the challenge was for me, will this process work in Nigeria? And because I believe in the process, I said yes. And then they informed me that we want you to do this process for 6 days, 6 hours a day, with the first group of incarcerated people in Nigeria at Jos prison, but all the offenders next to their names was condemn, 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 condemn. They were sentenced to death. They were on death row. And because I believe in this process, in custodial settings, it never bothered me to be afraid or nervous about the process. The commissioner was there the Saturday when their families also came, which I'll give you details. And I had 2 groups of offenders on death row in Nigeria that did the restorative justice process. Then I was asked to move to Kenya. And in Kenya, I also did restorative justice with about 60 incarcerated people, also on death row. And I will never forget my connection with these wonderful people. As a minister of the Church of Christ, the Church of England said once to his congregation, I spent a week at Paulsmoor prison. That alone got them eyes rolled. He said, don't worry, I was not locked up. I was on a restorative justice process. But for the first time, I met the faces of crime, and I love them. And people were shocked. The sad reality is, and everybody that worked behind bars will know that you're working with these people and you can't understand what really happened. In the Seychelles, we did restorative justice a number of times. And in the Seychelles had their own challenges. At that time there was no parole. So they had their challenges, but we never gave up on this process, and we went there from time to time. And so, in Africa, if people ask about Africa, the key in Africa is community, relationships, and the philosophy of Ubuntu. And I thought I'm going to break it up for you in this way about Ubuntu. It's very helpful for us in a restorative justice process. Ubuntu determines and influences everything a person thinks, says, and does. Ubuntu is about humanness. Ubuntu is about caring. It's about sharing. It's about caring and respect and compassion. And the communal life is the foundation of society in the spirit of family. But because of crime, the sad reality is, because of crime, families doesn't trust even neighbors anymore. They doesn't even trust their own families. So Ubuntu is at this point in time very challenging. But again, we brought at least the concept of Ubuntu back into our correctional facilities for people that committed crime, that were so disrespectful towards their own family, the community, the victims of crime, and they are extremely excited about this concept. And they commit themselves to do something about that. We even employed now recently a person that had a life sentence and is now released on parole, and he is working with us, and he said, I will make sure that people know about Ubuntu. Now the current system is saying that crime is an act against the state, a violation of the law, an abstract idea. And in many countries, in Africa also, this is what people believe, while the restorative justice process is saying crime is an act against a person and the community. Why do you marginalize the victims of crime? Why do you marginalize the community? Why do you only use them in the court of law to come and testify against Johnny so that Johnny can go spend time behind bars? Why don't you engage with everybody? The current system is saying, the retributive justice system is saying that crime, that punishment deters crime. And it's also saying that punishment changes behavior. I spent some time in Texas, and I can tell you up till today, with the death penalty in Texas, it did not deter crime, or it did not change behavior of people. It did not. So if America is saying that we are winning with safety of our communities, that's a huge challenge to debate. Because America believes that the best is punishment, because we believe it's going to deter crime and punishment will change behavior, put them behind bars. America has today, in 1991, America had 1.1 million prisoners. By 2013, America had over 2 million prisoners with 5,000 prisons. The highest prison population in the world. And yet they believe that punishment deters crime and punishment changes behavior. But if you look at the restorative justice process, doesn't throw out punishment, because it's saying punishment alone is not effective in changing behavior and is disruptive to community harmony and good relationships. So we in South Africa have a different concept now, where we are teaching our incarcerated people, you're not here for further punishment. You're here for your offending behavior to be corrected. So you need to take responsibility to serve your time, but we're going to help you to look at the bigger picture so that you can take responsibility and not see your prison sentence as a punishment. But we're going to journey with you, and they do understand that. Now you see the restorative justice versus the retributive justice. The process is now in our Constitution of 1996. This is a huge breakthrough, that our country brought restorative justice into our Criminal Procedures Act of 1977, obviously it is now also amended, and the Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998. It's there. No correctional official has the right to close their doors for restorative justice or victim-offender dialogue process. The retributive approach to justice had some important strength, but there is an ongoing acknowledgement of this limitations and failure. And we see this there. Retributive justice does not adequately meet the needs of victims, offenders, and the community. And I can give you story after story of people that we personally met with in terms of victims, offenders, and the community where the justice system failed them. And going to other countries, I hear the same, even up till 2 days ago here in Thailand. The current process of justice deepens societal wounds and conflict. And we have the evidence of that. A call to justice professionals to have the courage to share their frustrations, to contribute more towards a process of healing the wounds of crime and building a safe and more peaceful society. And we had many legal fraternities that embrace this process as well. I have been involved as a practitioner in the criminal justice field for about 30 years. The last 15 years, which has been a district court judge, for a great deal of time, I have been involved by reservations to our present punitive practice, which in turn have led me from time to time to question my own petition, my own. And this was Judge Michael Brown, and he is from New Zealand. And this is where he came out with the truth about the criminal justice system. Now you see there, in our legislation, in our country, the Correctional Services Act of 111, Chapter 4, Section 38 is saying, on assessment, stipulates that as soon as possible after admission as a sentenced offender, such offender must be assessed to determine his or her restorative justice requirements and needs regarding reintegration into society. And when this came out, we said, wow, this is great, because you will see later, when the people start with the restorative justice, almost too late. And there was huge challenges because it was almost too late. Now, Johnny has the possibility for parole, but Johnny must meet with his victim or his victim family if they are ready for that. And the victim's family say, you only come to us because Johnny won parole. They started too late with this process. Now it's saying, as soon as possible after admission, a sentenced offender, such offender must be assessed to determine his or her restorative justice requirements. And sentenced offenders may compel to participate in programs and to use services offered in terms of Section 1, 3, and 4, because there are so many brutal crimes, and those of them that refuse to do any processes, the National Commissioner has the right not to sign for parole for them. And according to the white paper on corrections in South Africa, rehabilitation is defined as a result of a process that combines the correction of offender behavior, human development, and the promotion of social responsibility and values. Rehabilitation should be viewed not merely as a strategy to prevent crime, but rather as a holistic event incorporating and encouraging social responsibility, social justice. Furthermore, rehabilitation should not only be seen as a tool to help offenders to return to the community, but as a means to long-term crime prevention. To be effective, rehabilitation must incorporate all aspects of the offender's life, which we will share with you now, and offer opportunities for education and training, personal development, personal well-being, socially, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that is why we focus a lot on behavior. And as I heard our previous speaker was speaking about, the authorities is looking for evidence of change. And what is your evidence of change? What is the impact of your process? That was asked to us many years ago, and we developed this process. And as I looked at the Western legal criminal justice system, which has its strength, but also its limitations, and acknowledged that the system's limitations and failure, the victims, the offender, the community members often feel that justice does not adequately meet their needs. If justice professionals, lawyers and prosecutors, probation officers, parole officers as well, of the Department of Correctional Services staff have the courage to share their frustrations regarding the Western legal or criminal justice system approach, they will contribute more towards a process of healing the wounds of crime and work towards a safe and more peaceful community. So when I do the training for the correctional officials, the frustrations is coming out there. And this makes it so true that when they tell us how the system also frustrates them. But at this stage, the process of justice deepens society rules, as I said, restorative justice in an attempt to address some of these needs and limitations. New Zealand has made restorative justice as a hub for its entire juvenile system. Restorative justice is considered in many countries as a sign of hope and direction for the future, and this is what we always see. Restorative justice begins as an effort to deal with burglary, other property crimes that are usually viewed, often incorrectly, as relatively minor offenses. There is no minor offense. And our country is now differentiate between the different crimes. Oh, we can deal with you because your crime is from an economic point of view. An economic point of view is, oh, you just stole a cell phone, or you just robbed someone from a cell phone, until we had once a story of a girl that walking around in one of our communities, and this is how she literally walks. And the reason for that was someone came behind her and grabbed her cell phone. She's still traumatized today. How can we say that this is just the economic crime? How can we say it's not a serious crime? There was no blood, there was no physical harm. What about the emotional damage? And we're dealing with all this, and we do not say that there is a crime that's less than any other crime. Today, however, restorative justice approaches are available in some communities for the most severe forms of the criminal justice system. But you need to understand the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where the brutality was mentioned face to face from the offender side and most of the offenders was policemen. And how they had to come to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and had to tell the families how they killed these people's loved ones. They had to tell how they took a bunch of people and buried them alive. And people had to listen to this brutality, but it was important for the families to get the truth from these people and to see if they have ever remorse. But there are many people across the world that still believe, lock them up and throw the key away. And I can understand when people say lock them up and throw the key away. I am very honest with any of our incarcerated people. My wife is honest to the females as well. We will tell them where we still see loopholes in their rehabilitation journey that they need to work on before release. But I want you to be honest for this picture. You see this picture. I want you, by the question, give me the answer that first came to you. What do you see on this picture? Anybody, what do you see on this picture?
Two people.
Two people. Two people. Keep it like that, sir. You believe it. Two people. Anybody else? Ma'am, what do you see?
I believe just like
you see whatever this is, you see this. Okay, so here's two opinions here, two people, and I see something like this. Anybody else? Your first impression of this picture, sir? You see one person. You see a face. Somebody's face. Okay. Okay, there's a third opinion here. Anybody else? A cup. Okay, that's a cup, man. Okay, anybody else? Now, who can be honest to say that who is only seeing a cup? Anybody only seeing a cup? Eh? Who see two faces? Eh? Okay, who sees something else? Now let's see. Okay, we see there one vase and two faces. One vase and two faces. Okay, now the reason why we have this, it is all too easy to only see something the way we see it. And that is why IPCA is a place for prison chaplains to get together, to gain more information, and to build more relationships, and to see more hope for the world. To see more hope for the world, so that we can believe that the way we saw things before in our own country can be different somewhere else. And that is why that we look at this in this way. But Dr. Zare is speaking about the need for us to see justice through a lens and describe restorative justice as a justice that heals. A key person in restorative justice, Dr. Howard Zare, look through the lens of restorative justice as a justice that heals. This is what he's saying. So what is restorative justice? And I was thinking about this last night because I came prepared for this, but I saw some new faces since I started with IPCA in the year 2000 in South Africa, then in Canada 2005, where we also studied at the Queen University on restorative justice, and also in Stockholm 2010 and 2015 Sydney, and now here, and I see a lot of new faces. But just very shortly, restorative justice is an opportunity for victims, offender, and a community to meet and discuss the crime and its aftermath, its effects, if they so desire. And our South African prisons is now so open for this, that many people across the world, across Africa, is coming to us to come and observe the process. And we give training to them as well. It's about amends, restitution. Expect offender to take steps to repair the harm they have caused by a keyword, taking responsibility. And I'm coming back to responsibility in a little while. And then also inclusion. Provide opportunities for all parties affected by crime to participate in its resolution. I have a few video clips that I want to show you. We can't just work with the incarcerated people. We can't just work with them, because they will tell us a story and we do not have the right to tell them, you're lying to us. We do not have the right to challenge them whatever they tell us. But as we engage with everybody that were affected by the crime, more information comes out and more restoration and healing became possible. And that is where we are, all inclusion. Reintegration. Our aim is to heal the wounds of crime between victims, the community and the offenders through the restorative justice and victim-offender dialogue process. Reintegration will be more effective. Some communities don't want you back. How do we deal with that? There is a country that claims that they are the best prison system in the world. But a film came up and we watched that film in Australia in IPCA 2015. And the story has been told about a young offender that murdered his girlfriend. And because of this beautiful system, he got 8 years for the murder, but because of this beautiful system also, that he could go home for a weekend because of good behavior. And when he walked to the shop, the victim's father found him on the shop and he was traumatized. He didn't know. Now this doesn't happen in our country anymore. If the Minister of Correctional Services find out that a local parole board approved parole for an offender without the engagement of the victim or the victim's family, the minister revoked that parole. Because the victims and their families had to be part of the process. In fact, there are two processes. Victim-offender dialogues can take place long before a parole hearing, but the parole board also have the responsibility to inform the victims or the victim's family 30 days before the hearing and invite them to be part of the parole hearing. They're not allowed to just issue parole without the engagement of the victims, because in terms of reintegration, you better understand the impact of the crime on the victims when you engage with the victims. And you also know, because of gang-related issues, in terms of reintegration, that people can take revenge on you. That's why we focus on the victim, the offender, and the community, which is very important. So where do we start with this process? I'm going to give you a little bit of information of the caliber of people that we work with, the caliber of people that we engage with. How can this process overnight change the lives of these people and make them ready for reintegration? No, it's not so easy. It's a process. There are people that I journeyed with for 20 years, 25 years, even 30 years, journey with them, and they're just about to move on with their lives now. Because the clip will tell you something.
Locked up in a prison is a lot of broken people. That is why we are passionate in working with those incarcerated, because unless someone is going to walk around with them and bringing them from brokenness to wholeness, they will continue to act out of brokenness.
A lot of broken people behind bars, and we're going to give you some information about that. The scary reality of people we receive behind bars. And this research came from Dr. Lacan, an American psychologist. And he found that the antisocial behavior in children, the cause of that, the root of that is poor parenting, absent fathers, and inadequate mothers. Many years ago, when I got this during my research, I brought it into the restorative justice, and the sad reality is how many of our clients on the process will tell us many of them comes out of all three of that challenges. Poor parenting, absent fathers, inadequate mothers. And then he said what he finds in terms of visible characters. The first one, and he found fearlessness. And when I speak to them behind bars and they start telling us they had no fear moving around in the communities. They had no fear to go to other places in our communities to see where there's opportunity to rob and steal and destroy. The second behavior is aggressiveness. The violent crimes that we experience. And the third one is sensation seeking. Craving even for position in the gang, in the community, but also behind bars. They craving to be in control of the prisons. That's why they have a number gang, 28, 26, and 27. And they will ask you, who are you in prison? Do you know who I am? It's all about sensation seeking. And so then I asked them, in terms of sensation seeking, I said, tell me, what is your community name? How do they know you in your community? And it's sad and shocking when you hear, but one person said, I am Mr. Terminator. Now I like to go and do my own personal research. So I went to this community called Bonteheuwel. If you research Bonteheuwel, you will be shocked to know what's going on in Bonteheuwel. And I got into my car, drove to Bonteheuwel, to this man's address, and when I got into that street, I got out and I saw a group of men standing there, and I said, guys, I'm looking for Mr. Terminator. And they went like this. Why? And then I told them, I just spoke with Mr. Terminator this morning behind bars. Oh, how's he doing? So, do you know him? Yeah, he's really Mr. Terminator. And there are many names. I don't know if you are aware of the chips that called Simba chips. And one guy said to me, I'm Simba. Why Simba? What's in on the Simba chips? A lion. I'm the lion in the community. It's all about sensation seeking. And so when I asked them, who of you had this kind of behaviors, they raised their hands. And how many of you with this behaviors connect to this? Almost 80% connect to them. And so, in every group that I work with between 80 and 100 years, I find my clients coming from that background and this kind of behavior. The sad reality of this.
More than 26 or 27 years in prison. I've started at a younger, tender age of 15 years. I was 15 when I got sentenced. I've got exposed to a lot of things in prison. I was harassed. I was verbally abused, sexually abused, because guys wanted to just sodomize me because I was a youngster, attractive youngster. When I grew up, the same things that they wanted to do with me, I was doing it with other guys, brother.
We heard that so many times. Hurting people hurts people. This was a beautiful young man that came into prison, and he was raped numerous times, and he tattooed his body full of tattoos to look ugly. But in 2012, as a high-ranking gangster, he came on our restorative justice process. And I've got a photo where he stood next to me and he said, "I'm finished." When he was released in 2013, we never saw him back. Actually, he stays very close to where I'm staying. He died last year, and he was also acting in a film called The Four Walls, or The Four Corners. He was acting in that as well. So the ripple effect of crime is also on children. So it's not easy that we let them look at the crime that they committed. I'm so sorry, I'm not going to do it again. We have to go to the roots of this. We have to help them to see that how the crime affected their families before we even look at the communities and the victims. And here we find two children sharing, the one shared about their mother.
4 years ago, so my mommy was sentenced. I knew she was going to get sentenced, but she took me a few weeks before that. So I kind of knew it was coming, but it took a big part of me away, because I depended on my mommy a lot. So when she left, it took a part of me away with her. But after those 4 years, I've learned that God has a plan for everybody. And it changed my life a lot after He brought my mom here. When I saw my mommy change, it changed me as well.
When I saw my mommy change, it changed me as well. Tanya was behind bars for fraud, and Tanya, after release, became our assistant financial administrator for a few years, and she's now working for a company in finances. Healing and restoration is possible, and their two daughters, the eldest one is now a second year studying psychology, and the youngest one will start next year with a law degree. And both of them are also involved in the Hope for Kids process. Now,
it was very sad for me.
When I was one of the advisors to the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services on life sentence offenders' profiles. And the position was about, I received 170 profiles a month that I have to read. The minimum pages is about 400 pages. And I had to read this 170 profiles to make my recommendation to the National Council of Correctional Services, a body that I belong to, and we make a collective recommendation to the minister. If the person should get parole or a further profile for further therapy or any other process, some family issues as well. And my wife shared with me about a lady that also served a life sentence. And I just want you to listen to her.
It was very sad for me not to have my family here on Family Day. Well, it's a pity that I'm only doing this course now in my almost 15 years sentence, because I think it's very important that you have to go through this process, the beginning of your sentence, that your family can walk with you this whole process, because it's not just a year program or just a program to have a certificate. It's difficult for me now at this stage, because my children is not children anymore, they're adults now, although they need healing. And now they've got their own lives now. But I know there's so much hurt.
My wife had to deal with her for a long time. But the sad reality is she was already 15 years in a life sentence before she came on this process. And with my wife and the social worker, they joined hands together, and my wife started to search for her son that didn't come to the family reconciliation process. And here we saw, 7 years later, she saw her son. Because 7 years prior to this, he didn't want anything to do with his mother anymore, because the unfortunate is, thank you sir, the unfortunate is that she involved her two sisters to kill her husband, the children's father. And so it was very challenging. When the son was younger, it was okay, but as he grew older, he then stayed away for 7 years. And on this process that he came and they reconnected again. And now she enjoys her life with her family. She's now being released on parole, and the parole is for the rest of her life. And for that reason, we started a pilot project. Because when I was in this position, I made a recommendation to the senior advocate of the minister. I said to her, I think we need to start a pilot project to bring life sentence offenders sooner onto the rehabilitation process. We can't push them away and say, no, you're still going to be for a long time here. Let's work for those who have 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years. You need to wait. It did not affect the offender alone. It did not affect their family alone. It also affected the victims, because when they need to come up for parole, then the victims are being informed, and then the victims is very upset. And I'm coming to the justice scale in a little while. A lady that she was 4 years in a life sentence. 4 years. And we connected with her. We went to my wife and we sat with my wife and this lady 4 years, and she voluntarily signed up for the restorative justice process. During that time, my wife found out that her husband has 2 life sentences in a prison 9 hours outside Cape Town. And my wife made arrangements through the regional office for the husband to come to the closest maximum security prison. He signed up for restorative justice and worked with him. Then the female center with a social worker and my wife brought this lady to her husband, and we had 3 engagements between the 2 of them. The 4th one was with their children. The 5th one was where the children was 2 and 3 years old when mom and dad was sentenced. They're now 15 and 16 years old. They want to know now, why are you in prison? And we had that session as well. 2 days ago, My wife sent me a photo. She took this young man, the eldest one now, for his final matric celebration. And he celebrated now his last year on school. And the mother, if you go into the female prison where she is, and you see the restorative justice team with their orange or red or green t-shirts, she's there amongst them because the authorities allow even her to be in private clothes as a facilitator. That's healing. Now, I met with her husband 3 weeks ago, and he gave me the details of the victims, and now in my return, I will now start a process with the victims, empowering the victims and to hear their side of the story in terms of their feelings and thoughts. And then we started to work, and this is now where I now work most of my life behind bars, with life sentence offenders. And every maximum security, they will request me to come and do this process with life sentence offenders, even those who have 3, 5, 6 life sentences. So, commit crime, and they get sentences. And they immediately think about themselves and forget about the victims and the victim's family. How long is your sentence, sir? Life in 10 years, 35 years, life, 30 years, 12 years, life in 50 years, 35 years, life, 15 and 25 years, life, 15 years, 18 years. Who of you got more than one life sentence? More than one life sentence. There's one, more than one life sentence. How many life sentences? 11 life sentences. 9 life sentences. Okay? Now this is the confusing part for the community and the victims in our country. You get 11 life sentences, but the 11 life sentences run concurrent. So technically speaking, you only got 1 life sentence. And during the court procedures, when the judge said, I sentence you to life for each crime, and it's 11 life sentences, the victims is excited because Johnny's going to die behind bars. And 20 years later, they contact the victims and they hear that there is going to be a parole hearing. And then people get upset. And so that's why we need to engage more with the offenders, with the victims of crime, and do this offender rehabilitation path with them to help them understand the journey. I'm going to, for the sake of time, just give you all of this. This is the restorative justice principles. That crime damages relationships. And we do this in a very practical way. Because the question that I ask the clients is, how many of you never allow your family to ask you questions? Then they raise their hands. Why not? It's not their business. I don't want them to know what I'm doing. I'm too embarrassed to tell them. And then I ask them, how many of you want to hear from your family? And then some of them said yes, some of them said no. Then I, with their permission, I phoned the family out of the class and I asked Mommy to share Mommy's feelings and Mommy's thoughts about Johnny's behavior of the past. Every phone call, everybody listened to this. The hardened criminals even break down when they listen to family members about the crime that damage relationships. You can't run away from this. You have to address the broken relationship. It must be discussed. You need to be encouraged to repair that damaged relationship. Taking responsibility and also focus on the harm caused by crime, and you must have a different way of thinking about crime. Our gangsters in our community saying, we're not murderers, we only kill gangsters. Some of our gangsters in the community walk with knives and firearms, and they say, we don't want to use it, we just have it for just in case. And 95% of times, the just in case took the life of another person. And they need to think different about crime, and it's also to seek redress for victims, to amend and repair. Now, I'm coming to a picture here. Before I go to the picture, I just want you to say, how do we test, and this is what excites the authorities, how do we test the genuineness of this journey with the restorative justice principles? How do we test this? Do we just say, yes, I take responsibility, I'm sorry for what I did, now that I focus on the harm caused by... No, it's not so easy. I place my own life at stake. You can be the highest gangster in there, and many gangsters came to sign up for this process because they want to know what this process is all about. And then I said to them, if you are really genuine with these principles, you will break ties with the negative friends outside. If you're genuine. And if you're genuine, you will break ties with negative prison influence. And this is what I say to you. If you're really genuine and you looked at the impact of your crime, I want you to consider to come stand here next to me and tell your gangster brothers, I'm out. But the problem is, the gang mentality is, there's only one door in, the door out is death. And this is what I say, if you're serious, you come to the front and they kill you tonight, I will bury you next week, and I will go to your funeral and tell the people you died because you made the best decision in your life. 27 years, nobody got killed. Nobody got hurt because everybody saw, the authorities saw the genuineness of this. The special task force team in one prison ran to the chaplain the Monday morning and said, Chaplain, we want to support you because we saw how these guys that gives us so much challenges behind us, how they broke down on this process. And that's why we challenge them. We don't just take anything for granted. Now, the question is here. You know that this is the normal justice scale. Now, can I ask you, and I'm going to rush now to finish, can I ask you, if we have this as a justice scale, and we had, whether it is brutal sexual offenses or murder, and the judge found you guilty, and the judge gives you a life sentence, sometimes even one guy's got 6 life sentences plus 162 years. That just gives us an indication of the brutality of his crime. But it's still 1 life sentence. And the victim's family said, yes, justice prevailed. This is good. And the offender is going down. He's going to rot behind bars. Now the question that I always ask, is the justice prevailed when someone is sentenced harshly for the crime that was committed? Is that justice? I'm asking. Is that justice? And I took on my research information to bring some information to this justice scale. And the first thing here is that there is a distributive part determining who gets what. It's the procedural part determining how fairly people are treated. The retributive part based on the punishment for the wrongdoing, and then the restorative part which tries to restore the relationships to righteousness. But then I also found the biblical justice means to make right. And I want to say this respectfully. I find in my country and some other countries where I work that the people that find it difficult to connect with, as they will call them, prisoners, is many Christian churches. That is what I find. Pastors, priests. I find that people, one gentleman murdered someone in front of his two little boys in the car. He threw lights for this man. He didn't know that this is an over 70-year-old man. And he threw lights and the guy was too slow. And he overtook the guy, stopped, took out his hockey stick, and he killed this guy in front of his children and his wife just because this guy was driving too slow. So when I found out many years later working with him that this family is at a church in the same denomination that I work with. And I said to the senior pastor, I've got a letter that I want you to read. If you feel this victim should never see this letter, burn it up. He said to me, do you know what? I don't even want to touch that letter. I was disappointed, but I also had to understand how people feel about crime. But Plato and Aristotle considered justice to be the mother of virtue. And that is powerful information. Now, what do we do with the justice scale? How can we see justice here? We first need to recognize the victim. We say the victim is at the center of this process. Yes, it's great to work with the offenders. Yes, it's great to see how they come to serve the Lord, how they do their Bible studies, how they worship and fellowship with one another. But the question is always, did you ever think about your victim or your victim's family? Some of them said, why must we think about, we are sentenced. We're paying a price for what we did. But there are questions that victims ask. Some of the victims want to know, why did you do it? How did you do it? Who was with you? They want to express their feelings. And what was your journey during your incarceration? They even want to know who was your accomplices, because on the video, you were 3 people in our house when you killed our mother, but only you were standing for this case. So there is a lot of questions unanswered of victims. And then, this is also not in place. Victims should have a victim support and empowerment system. The families of the victims that need support. The crime against business needs to come on board. Community and church leaders, community at large, family of incarcerated people, the police, social services, National Prosecuting Authority, Department of Health, Justice and Correctional Services, the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services. But the victims is saying to us, no one of these people is close to us. And then we need to work with them again. So how can we say that justice prevailed? And then we come to the offender. And the offender, we need to journey with them. This is a very key word, taking responsibility. Taking responsibility. And then also the truth is very important, because by that they will also see if there's a remorse. Many judges will say, you're going to get the maximum sentence because you show no remorse. For the sake of time, then there is the correctional services with the offender. There is a unit, assessment unit, needs assessment, offender rehabilitation plan, the sentence plan. These are all professionals working with the offender. But many of this is taking place in the absence of the victims in the past. And now we bring the victims on board as well. And this is how we journey. Now I'm just going to put you up this. This is just the 100 hours that we journey with them. We start with the orientation. Now this orientation is very important because we had an agreement with Correctional Services called the Operational Agreement. And in the Operational Agreement, we must present our process with a group of offenders and they can sign up voluntarily, irrespective of their religion. And we had all kinds of religions that sign up for this process. And the one that I want to bring across to you is the one that in this orientation, a guy asked me, do you want me to be part of your process? I said, why not? He said, but don't you know that I'm a Satanist? I said, you're welcome to join us. And he came back and walked in with a Bible in his hand, and he set the Bible alight in front of me. And I said to him, brother, that words is already in my heart, in my mind. And he just threw it one side and he went to sit down. He went through the process. Time don't allow me to tell you, you must see this guy now in this day and age. And so this is where we use every concept here. Here we spend 36 hours with him on the process of examine the roots, the ripple effect of crime, taking responsibility, accountability, confession, repentance, unforgiveness. There is no freedom, forgiveness, restitution, reconciliation. And you know what? Whoever do restorative justice, these words are all in the Word of God. So no one of us can claim this, and this is my words. All of these words is in God's Word. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the one thing that we really worked on is to look at the antisocial behavior of them. And I come to the last because this is just that this is Mr. Graham Chapman. I want you to listen to his daughter.
I want to introduce you to somebody I loved very, very, very dearly. And that is the gorgeous man I called my daddy. And we all have a daddy, whether he was good, whether he was bad. Mine wasn't perfect, he was no angel, but I loved him. It was my daddy. It was the guy on whose lap I could sit. And the first man who ever said to me, you are so beautiful. Even though I maybe wasn't. But at that stage, guys, I just loved him so much. And like Jonathan says, he's been gone for close to 20 odd years now, and I still love him so much. And it's important for your victims to know that you know they were loved. And it's important for you to know that your victims' families will miss them forever. Ever and ever and ever. Every single Father's Day, every single Mother's Day, every single birthday, every single Christmas, you name it. The victim's family, they yearn just for one more chance to hear the words, I love you, or Daddy, I love you. Just one more time. For lunch, everything was, the tables, the food was cooked, not a great meal. And my granny and grandpa says, but where's Graham? And his wife said, no, he was so upset because him and Jennifer had this massive fight. So he went for a walk, he's not back yet. They're like, sure, that's not him, he missed church. He never misses church. Yeah, but I'm sure he'll be back now. And she dished out a nice plate of food for him, and they ate. 3 o'clock, Granny and Grandpa said, no, something is wrong.
Now, just in closing, that this was the murder weapon. And the brutality of this was when they asked the offender to look at the murder weapon. It was refused. I don't want to look at it. The murder weapon was then later described by the late Dr. Irma Labuschagne, that someone who used a weapon like this is a crossbow to kill elephants and buffaloes. And Dr. Labuschagne said that someone who used a weapon like this can commit a crime again in the future. And that's why the family was engaged in this whole journey. And when we sat with the victim-offender dialogue process, the murderer was unfortunately the wife of him. And that was the challenge. And when they asked her, did you see how Daddy looked when he came out of the river? Because after you shot him in the head with a crossbow, you went to throw him in the river. She didn't want to see. Now this is very graphic, but this is when we work with offenders, and offenders is even refusing to see this, then the question is, you don't understand the impact of the victims. And since we use this graphic, we call our victims of crime of other crimes, and then it's where they break down. And this is how the body looked. They found an arrow in his head. They later found out that he didn't die because of the arrow in his head. He died because he drowned. And to the surprise of the victims, they were very upset, is that they saw in court the skull of their loved one in court. And that is what really upset them. And so we take them through the process of restorative justice with the victims and the ripple effect of the crime, and we discuss all the feelings and the thoughts and the experiences and what victims want and what victims experience. And so the question today is there hope?
I have hope in Christ. I can see a better future. For me, at the beginning it was very humiliating to end up in a place like this. But after realizing what I did and why I am here, I almost took it like as a blessing, because yeah, I've changed a lot.
There's no words to describe how grateful I am to the ministry, to Hope Ministries. God has given me hope. He has given me, He's brought peace into my life. He's given me dreams. He's given me something to look forward to.
And so we would like to see this impact Paulsville, but even further our country, as more people's lives are transformed by the power of God. That is the only way crime can be reduced.
When we come into prison, realizing the evil crimes that was committed, meeting up with these people, we see a face, we see a person made in the image of God. When people come and admit their wrong, that come with remorse, turning to God, seeking forgiveness, and be reconciled to God through His Son Jesus Christ. That's the people that excites us and let us come back over and over again. It is amazing how many inmates that accepted the Lord in their lives experience freedom in Christ behind bars. The hope in prison ministry is, when rejected once, realize that there is acceptance from God's side, that there is acceptance from God's children. Many of them experience rejection. Now to hear, according to Romans 8, that there is no more condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, that gives hope
to the helpless.
Can I actually?
The Word of God is so powerful behind bars. The Mandela mindset regarding reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission concept, Correctional Services Partnership, they now ask us to be in all 243 prisons in our country because of the impact of this process. The Mandela Rule, the Bangkok Rule, IPCA, all our partners across the world join us in Africa, not just to come and teach us alone, but also to come and learn from us. I thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a good presentation. The view of the restorative justice according to the African perspective.